for the passing of the pilgrims on their route to Hajj from the occupied territories. So it also comes in on the back of the visit of the special European Commission envoy who has met with President Abbas in Ramallah. So it comes in at a time where it is the right moment to start to pick up the peace process and the talks again.
We move to the Daily Star, an article that speaks of Cyprus gas who could reach Europe through Egypt facilities. The article speaks about the head of the Italian energy producer who says that gas found in the waters of Cyprus could be transported to the European markets through the company's processing facilities in Egypt. We also do know that just very shortly, Egypt also discovered other means of gas through the Mediterranean waters. What does this again mean to the economy of Egypt, and how can the people of Egypt benefit from such projects?
A great discovery that has happened at the end of August, where this in the tunes of 30 trillion cubic feet of natural gas was discovered in Al Zuhur field. In what is billed to be the largest ever in the Mediterranean, and possibly one of the largest natural gas discoveries in the world. The story is twofold here. One is Cyprus being, the Republic of Cyprus could serve as a strategic energy hub and a possible conduit for future Egyptian natural gas supply. So the talks that took place in Cyprus earlier this week talks about building a joint development in the entire area of the Eastern Mediterranean, where the company, I think Eni said in a statement, that the area could be of a crucial strategic importance as a natural hub, a natural gas hub for the entire region, a pathway where Cyprus could play a pathway to Europe for the Egyptian gas should Egypt resume its export. Also, Egypt playing a crucial role in processing gas discovered off the shores of Cyprus. So what the Italian company is talking about here is talking about bringing synergy in the entire Eastern Mediterranean area.
We move to the Jerusalem Post. According to the order of my of the articles with me, Lebanese government agrees plans to resolve the waste crisis, and Lebanon's government agreed a plan to resolve a waste disposal crisis late on Wednesday, ending the dispute that has been taking place for a while. We do know that there have been protests calling for cleaning the streets or the trash on the streets of Lebanon, which turned later on into an aggressive violence, and then the ceiling of demand by the protesters exceeded the removal of the waste to the change of the government and so forth. And they did give last Wednesday as the deadline. How do you see the problem in Lebanon that was triggered originally for the waste being resolved, or on this positive, correct steps towards resolve?
It is as the audience might know, and as a lot of analysts have bailed the area, bailed the actual problem. The problem of the waste is nothing but a smoke screen, where different players are trying to settle scores behind the scene, pushing this very particular issue to a dead end in order to talk about demands which far exceed the reality of the situations. I think the protests which have taken the streets have demanded a lot more than what the situation actually calls for. I think a lot of the political players, namely Hezbollah and the other political parties, are attempting to use the situation for their own benefit. And I think the resolution of the original issue might bring peace to the original situation.
Okay, we move to the Khaliji Times, and Daesh uses images of drowned toddlers to warn refugees. According to the article, Daesh said that people were committing a dangerous major sin by bringing children to the West, where they are under the constant threat of drugs and other kinds of threats, as well as alcohol. Really strange. Daesh has used the shocking images of the drowned Syrian toddlers, especially the Ayan Kurdi. Of course, that was the popular image that was rotated along social media and different forms of media. Do you think that Daesh is really making abuse or taking advantage of such, incidents and footage to sort of propagate their ideologies and to spread their ideologies?
I think the issue further highlights the problem, and no matter what claims with ISIL or Daesh bring, the real problem or the real white elephant in the room remains the problem with the refugees and the illegal immigration crisis, which is taking the Mediterranean by storm, whether the influx of refugees coming from Libya or the influx of the refugees coming from Syria, and how the European Commission is planning to deal with this particular problem. I think the picture, this is the very saddening and tragic picture of the toddler, which have swept the social media specifically and took the social media by storm. It serves, albeit heartbreaking, goes to serve that this particular issue is nowhere near getting a resolution. I think the European Union is now talking about quotas, but what we're talking about here is dealing with an aftermath of a problem that needs intervention to be resolved, and unfortunately the world, whether on on this side or on the European side, need to brace itself for a longer period.
Yeah, but isn't it a bit strange? I mean, while people are criticizing the West for not accepting any more refugees or any refugees at all, many people are also criticizing, well, where is the Gulf countries from all this? Why aren't they receiving refugees? Although we know that King Salman only yesterday, I believe, or before yesterday, did announce that he will be accepting a certain number of refugees that fall under certain criteria. But we have other countries like Kuwait and Dubai, for instance, the United Arab Emirates. I mean, the region itself is not accepting Syrian refugees, apart from Egypt and Jordan. I believe maybe Jordan is the number one. And Lebanon. And Iraq as well. Do you think that possibly this could be an alarm that says, well, half of the population of Syria are leaving the country? If more than that leave the country, then possibly this could mean that the land would be taken by somebody else who would benefit from, taking this land. I'm talking about Israel here in particular.
Well, absolutely. What we're looking at is this episode of mass migration, and the mass migration towards the West is historically because the West has always held the fact of a promise of a better future, of development. There are laws in place and settlements and conditions for refugees, things, to your point, which whether Gulf countries or Arab countries, they don't have this particular conditions in place. Even in countries which have been and we have to say very generous to the situation, as for example Egypt, which has taken its share of influx from Iraqi refugees at the time of the Iraqi crisis, and now Syrian refugees.
Yes.
However, not a lot of organizations has been put in place. It's been done by the fact of good Samaritans, by the goodwill of the people who accept to share in other people's unfortunate situations. However, the laws and regulations about handling refugees are not in place, and I think it is time to start to enact things like this in place.
Now, although many people who are against Bashar al-Assad's regime believe that al-Assad is the main cause why these people are actually leaving their countries, yet Russia, for instance, believes that it's Daesh that's forcing people to leave Syria and not al-Assad's regime. We move to the Gulf today, and Russian forces join combat in Syria. The Russian forces began participating in combat operations in Syria to help defend President Bashar al-Assad's government, and three Lebanese sources familiar with the political and military situation there said on Wednesday that speaking to Reuters in particular, the conditions giving the most forthright account yet from the region of what U.S. officials say appears to be a new military built up by Moscow, one of Assad's main allies, through one of the sources did say that Russia is still supporting Bashar al-Assad's regime despite all the pressures that this regime is having from many neighboring countries, despite the pressures that the U.S. is also putting on the Syrian government by financially and supporting Daesh and training as well the Daesh militants. Is this war really at the end a Russian-American war, being Syria in the middle, used as a tool to just prove who is going to be more powerful to put foot on ground and stay on the Syrian country, taking into consideration its geographic place on the map as well?
It is a larger, it is a lot larger than this, because it is a full-fledged, as we call it, war by proxy, not only between superpowers, but also a war by proxy, which has a sectarian flavor to it, because what you have brewing behind the scene is a Sunni Shia type of war, which is building in not only butting U.S. versus Russian interest, but also throw in China in the mix, throw in Iran, which is trying to establish its influence in the region, partly through Hezbollah in Lebanon, partly through the support of al-Assad regime. So the situation is very complex, and the involvement of the Russians has always been there, because they've always been provided whether weapons or technical expertise. It is an unfortunate situation which takes the same exact roots as the situation we've seen before, as the U.S.-China confrontation through the war by proxy, which has taken place in Vietnam in the 60s and the 70s. We're looking at another rendition which is taking place, very difficult because it's far complex. It has Gulf countries versus Iran, it has the U.S. Versus China and Russia. So the situation is far more complex than any regional conflict we've ever seen.
Yes, we move to the Daily Star. Saudi-led coalition raids target Yemen bases and Houthi leaders' houses. And according to the article, warplanes from a Saudi-led military alliance bombed targets throughout Yemen's capital Sana'a on Thursday in what witnesses described as a fierce series of attacks on the city in over 5 months of war. The raids hit the houses of political leaders in the Iran-allied Houthi movement and military bases, as well as explosions and wailing ambulances. Sirens forced a sleepless night in the city's nearly 2 million shell-shocked residents. Do you think that there is some sort of an escalation in the war between the Houthis and Saudi-led coalition, especially after the loss of the lives of some of the coalition forces, whether from the United Arab Emirates or from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? 5 months, wow, already have passed. How long will it take before this operation Al-Hazm Storm is over, accomplishing its achievements, which, taking into consideration many times before, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia proved that they have, accomplished their goals in the war, which seemed, of course, to be negative by time?
I think the situation is even getting more complex, because as we've spoken about the Syrian situation, this particular war takes also another flavor, because we have seen last week, although as 6 months ago, you have also Daesh with involvement in Yemen, albeit not through organized military activities, but through a lot of terrorist acts, such as bombing mosques. So in one end, you have the central government of Yemen, which is backed by Al-Hazm storm or operation. At the other end, you have Houthis backed by Iran, and then you have Daesh, who has, in the month of November, proclaimed Sana'a as one of the wilayats of their rule throughout the region.
Why is it always, Doctor, there's a smell of a Shiite-Sunni sort of war? Because it's really strange to see Saudi Arabia and the GCC and, the Arab leagues, with the 26 Arab member states, members of it supporting Yemen's president against the Houthis, while they're not doing the same scenario with Syria, supporting Al-Assad against Daesh and Al-Nusra Front and the so many other terrorist groups that have become out of this almost 3 to 4 years of war. Why do we see this double standards by politicians when it comes to their interest that has become very clear to the whole world right now?
I think what we're looking at is, at the face value of all of it, is an issue which I think is going to get further complicated, specifically after the ratification of the Iran nuclear deal. What you have here is Iran imposing itself throughout the region as a superpower, and specifically through the Gulf area, you have this confrontation between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran, whereby the U.S. is trying to cool the situation and avoid further complications. But here you have it. At the end of the day, as we've spoken about the Syrian situation, you have the presence of Iran, which further complicates. Even when we talked about the simple trash demonstrations, further complicated by the presence of Hezbollah, who's an extension of the Iranian influence in the region. Houthis, which are backed by Iran, and another extension of the Iranian influence in the region. This is basically what you have.
Speaking of Iran, basically, briefly, before we end up, because we just have a minute or two, there have been statements by Iranian officials yesterday saying that they're willing to negotiate Syria or over Syria with the United States. Now, for the benefits, again, and the personal interests of Iran, do we think that Iran could change its position towards Syria to save itself and its nuclear program, which again could change the equation in the Syrian conflict and possibly the start of the fall of al-Assad regime?
I'm not quite sure that Iran would go this route, because because whether the Yemeni situation or the Syrian situation have not been part and parcel of the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal, and specifically the confrontation between Iran and the rest of the Gulf countries, is all based upon guaranteeing that the Gulf countries will have equal footing in the program, and should Iran come close to owning the bomb, that the other Gulf countries, and namely Saudi Arabia, will be in the same position. But it's pretty much impossible to bring Syria or Yemen as a clear part in a deal which will take place.
Very well, Dr. Mohammed Fouade, political and economic expert. Thank you very much for your insight and for joining us on our program. This brings us to the end of our program of The World Today. Thank you very much for watching.